How we doing? Everybody good? I know it's Monday, and especially those of us in the legal officer track who've been doing this since Saturday. As you can tell from the raspy voice, we're about done. We have one more class in the legal officer section will be completed. We had a very good weekend of some excellent training along the way by our legal officers, and as always, we thank you for attending. This is going to be like church, because IACP still hasn't learned that we will pack a room no matter where you put us. So if you like Christmas Eve Mass, if you have a seat next to you, raise your hand and slide to the right. And I promise you, even though we are, so all of you in the back, there is seats. And we will not find it offensive if you leave during the presentation, but we will write your name down, so it's okay. And the other thing that we will not do is, even though we are lawyers, we will not pass the bucket. So the reality of today is, after a long weekend of use of force and crowd control and employment law and this morning's retention and recruitment, we wanted to have a class that really focuses on the humorous but the necessary part of the discussion. And all of you sitting in the room, I'm sure you've been to other training classes this weekend where these discussions were had, but hopefully you have not seen it in the way that we're going to give it to you today. Those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Eric Daigle. I'm the principal of Daigle Law Group, and I am now happy to say the past chair of the legal officer section, as Bill Amato took over yesterday as the chair, and we are happy to add to our board of directors Zeed Saline and Aaron Jones over here from Cincinnati and Memphis, who are now on the board of directors for LOS. So as I was sitting through putting together this presentation as the scope of what we're going to have, I said, we got to touch this marijuana issue. As I started to get PowerPoint presentations from other legal officers, especially the employment law section, we started to really, what Jody did yesterday, we started to realize that we better start opening the conversation now. And as I talk to you all across the country, I get a lot of pushback from police chiefs when I ask simple questions like, do you have a policy yet? We don't need a policy yet. Why not? Well, it's not legal here. Okay. Have they started the process yet? What's the process? Well, if you haven't figured it out, it's a 3-step process. Step number 1 is decriminalization, right? Moving possession to infraction levels. Step number 2 is medical marijuana. And step number 3 is let's party, right? And the reality of that is, especially all of us sitting in the room, whose generation is at the higher end, we go, we're not ready for this. We have implicit biases. We have already institutionalized issues that are affecting. Why? Because on the lower level, I'm looking at police officers and I'm saying, we got to have some search and seizure discussions. What does that mean? The smell of marijuana is not the gateway to everything anymore, right? The operation is the challenge. The medical marijuana aspect, and I get across the country, when I walk into police departments with police officers and we start talking about marijuana, they only have one question. You know what that question is? Can I smoke it? And as your legal advisor, I say no. Not until you retire. And the reality of this is, with the issues of medical marijuana, and as Jody said yesterday, the ADA, FMLA, family members, the use of medical marijuana, and then the transition to recreational, we have some very significant problems that you may not have to deal with when you leave the room today, but you better be thinking about them. And we as a nation need to decide, and IACP in general, the legal officer section, needs to talk about the operational issues. As most of you know, I'm a policy guy. I'm about writing the policy that will guide your operation. And like all good policy people and all the legal officers that you have, policies without support or basis are worthless. Policies that don't point to guidance or direction will not survive the test of the courtroom, will not survive the labor arbitration, it will not survive the termination of the employee. So I have the opportunity to reach out to someone that I knew would know the best, and that is, most lawyers know this. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. But I'm always going to find the person that knows more. And in my world, the person that knows more is Tim Gunther. Tim and I have known each other for a long time. Some of you may have interacted with Tim during his time at Power DMS. But Tim got smart. And Tim said, there's marijuana coming. And Tim said, I should make a company that deals with that. And I said, it's probably a smart move. And then he went out and did what Tim does best and became a guru in the industry. And when we sat down and I started to talk about the issues we should talk about, we decided, let's put together a fun class. Let's put together a class that deals with the issues, because if I make it a lawyer class and say, are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? You won't make it to the host chief night. You'll make it to the bar, and that's about it. And so what we have to talk about is, these are the areas that we're seeing a significant problem in. The marijuana industry update. Where are we and where are we going? Where can you get the information? What are the current issues? Marijuana extraction, employment policies and employment law, marijuana banking and public safety, updating your search and seizure policies and the issues we're seeing, officer wellness and officer safety in the area of emergency preparedness, and what they don't know when they're walking through a door, that they don't know where they're going and what the problem is. And then where we should be paying attention to, and I think the way this is going to work is at least for the next year, so that we can come back next year and say, these are the policy issues that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to work with Tim through this. I'm going to stay on the policy side and let Tim stay on the industry side. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Gunther, the Chief Compliance Officer of TGunther Group.
Thank you. First, Eric did say I was smart. I'm not an attorney, number one. So,
You going to start already?
no, I'm going to start on that. I got to start with you. So, I left. I've been in compliance. I was at Power EMS, and I worked with a lot of state chiefs associations, healthcare compliance. The reason I got into this business, I'm the youngest of 17 children, all same parents, not adopted, Catholic, grew up in California, not on a farm. One of my brothers had cancer about 3 years ago, and he lived in California and got a medical marijuana card, which he had a right to do, and then went to a dispensary, got product, and had a bad reaction. So he called me and told me what was going on. I said, don't they have regulations in this business? Don't they have compliance? And he's like, I don't know. So as soon as I started doing the research, I was like, wow, California's been legal since 1996, and they're just getting ready to put out regulations January 1st. 19 years. Now, when you think about that, it's a challenge. So I left because for me, it was about learning. My wife's a former federal agent, about learning about what is the marijuana, and I've only known it as that bad thing that people get arrested for, or that drug. But I'm going to hopefully educate you on what I believe is happening in the industry. And over the last 2 years, it's been fascinating for me to be a part of meetings like this with fire departments, with city and local government. Everybody's at a standstill of what's going on. So I've always been told the best way to start a presentation is with a video. This movie is very important, so if you haven't seen it, I've got the link. You can see the full hour version of it, so just prepare yourself.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance, innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity.
So as you can see, 1936, this was the start of when marijuana first became an issue in the United States. Even prior to that, it was used medicinally. I haven't seen anybody that I've been around at marijuana conferences, because everybody's asked me, well, do you get samples and what do? They don't play the piano and smoke like that at the conferences. But it's important for you to understand. So industry update, and it surprises me that until I got into this business, what it's about, and it's important for you to understand this point. First of all, it's a Schedule I drug. We all know that. And why it's a Schedule I? Because Schedule I has no medical value. That's the definition outside of everything else. That's why it's a Schedule I. However, 2003, if you don't know, the U.S. has a patent on cannabis, on the cannabinoid, on the non-psychoactive portion of it. And it's because it does have medical benefits, right? But because it's Schedule I, you can't do anything with it or study it. It's an important fact, and the thing about that is that the cannabinoid plant, and when you learn about it, has over 500 elements. The THC is what you guys know about. And again, self-learned over the last year and a half, which just really surprised me. Old Miss, anybody go to Old Miss here? Nope, they got their own pot farm. That's it, rolling in the video. So for the last 30 years, Old Miss has been the university in partnership with NIDA to be the ones that were doing marijuana testing. Now, I will tell you, if you're a scientist, or if you remember back in science, if you only have one person testing it and no one else can prove it, and they're coming out with results, it's kind of hard. So last year, on the 12th of August of last year, the DEA, and I call it monopoly, but the DEA ended they opened up the application process. And just recently, Jeff Sessions was testifying last week. They had 26 applicants to now start testing. LSU and Southern have actually partnered with facilities to start testing marijuana from a medical perspective. It's an important perspective that you may not know. Now, the driving factor, who's heard of the Cole memo? Right? Okay, if you've not raised your hand, I'm going to tell you all the links, and I will resend you this presentation because I did some updates with my contact, or if you give me your card. The Cole memo is the driving force why states are able to have a program in place, right? And if you read the Cole memo, those 6 core principles of it. The FinCEN memo, because how many people believe that marijuana businesses cannot use traditional banking services? Raise your hand if you believe that marijuana businesses cannot use banking. Raise your hand if you believe that. They can. There's 300 institutions. I'm going to talk about that, and one of the challenges is. Again, there's a bunch of academic studies, and I'm going to talk a few others, but for me, it was about a discovery of let's uncover the truths and not truths in the world of fake news and real news. I'm not here spreading anything but what I've found, right? Now, internationally, all these countries have a program that's legal with some sort of marijuana program. Now, last year, if you attended my presentation, which I was here, so since then, Canada goes full legal in July. The newest one, Peru, let me get my little pointer here. Peru, last week, just approved medical marijuana. Mexico, Uruguay is fully legal. Germany just approved it in February. What I'm telling you is this is not just a U.S. phenomenon and we're all worried about it. It's happening internationally. And as this is IACP, it's important for us to talk to our law enforcement folks on the other side to say, what are the issues you're dealing with? And many of you may not have known that. Okay, here's the other slide I did. Last year, it was right before the elections, right? I was sitting up here and I knew there were 9 ballot initiatives last year. 8 of the 9 passed, right? Think about that. 8 of 9, and when I got up here last year, I said maybe 2 will pass because I didn't know. But you look at percentages. So the thing that's really important is the green, California, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Maine approved recreational. Now there's 8 of those recreational. Florida is where I live. Arkansas, Montana, and North Dakota all have a medical program. And I'm just telling you, there's 29 states plus DC. It's out there and you need to be aware of that, and I'm just trying to, again, educate. So everybody always asks me how much money is in this, right? So last year when I presented, I think the prediction for close of 2016 was going to be around 6.1 billion. They closed the year roughly around 6.9 billion. Now, companies that are investing, this is very important. Last year I mentioned Scott's Miracle-Gro. At that time last year, $125 million. They invested another almost $400 million into the business. Because it's Scott's Miracle-Gro, who uses it to grow plants, right? So they're in the business. Microsoft, who's one of the partners here, had partnered with a seed-to-sale tracking software. Now, really important, GW Pharmaceutical, their stock doubled when they came out with the announcement because they did first clinical trials showing that, who has an opioid problem in their state? If I don't see hands up, I'd be very surprised, right? So they did a study that showed that when they treated people who had opioid for their medicine and they blended in medical marijuana, their opioid went down by 25% and eventually going away. You can find the study online, but that was the opening of why things are happening. So you have to understand, like, medically things have not been proven, but they will be in the United States. The other interesting fact about this, the NFL. It's funny now, the NFL Players Union is doing a study because think about all the NFL players who retire. I mean, I've seen some documentaries on NFL players who retire and is just addicted to opioids and everything else. They're now doing a study to see if there's benefits for it. So the only reason I'm saying this is because it's important for you to understand that it's out there. Now I'm going to cover, there's lots I can cover here on the marijuana extraction, but I'm going to cover what I think are issues that are facing with public safety that I've seen in talking to several chiefs in the room that I have relationships with that I've talked to about this. So edibles is where the most profit is for marijuana related, I'm going to call it an MRB, marijuana related business. Edibles is the most profitable part of their business. It's not selling weed for smoking. It's for edibles or infused products. Everything on the screen is stuff that's sold today in some states. Infused lasagna with cannabis, right? All that stuff. It's all right. But the thing is their states are realizing, this is really important. I have the X's next to ones like Colorado just passed that now edibles cannot be in the shape of any candies that are familiar to kids, right? So as you guys are going through, even the new states, really think about and look at the laws that were passed because you're going to face those same problems. And the edible business for, like in California, it's going to be, California goes full recreational January 1st. I've been on several boards with the California regulation waiting for them to come out. They haven't even released the regulations yet. And it's going to be interesting because California, my estimates, will do $4 billion by itself by the end of next year in recreational sales. $4 billion, not million, billion. Now, the extraction process, and the only reason I'm going to show you this, I'm not going to go in, is because who in their state has had has seen an article pop up about a butane explosion, right? House gets knocked off. I'm going to cover that in a second. But in a legal operation, in extraction equipment, this is solvent-based, propane, butane, ethanol, and carbon dioxide. Over here, and again, all the links I have where you can go get all the information, and I don't have a problem sharing it. But out of all these, carbon dioxide, CO2, what are called closed-loop systems, and I'm going to cover that in a second. Legitimate businesses who are in a state that it's legal, right, trying to follow OSHA, even though they're not technically required, trying to follow all these extraction processes. And I've talked to chiefs from Washington, the head of the Cannabis board there, and just that when you're doing inspections as a police officer and you're on the marijuana team now, there's things you have to understand about this business. And I'm not going to go into how extractions happen, but I want to show you some other stuff that's important. Essentially, and again, I told you the extraction is the most profitable part for a marijuana-related business. That's where they can take a plant that's, let's just say, 15% THC in the plant. Not I'm almost 50, and I have lots of brothers who tried marijuana way back when. It's not the 3% stuff. When it gets extracted at 15%, when they come out with the final product, sometimes it's as high as 60%, right? Because that's the process they use, and they're doing it because the laws say you can only have so many milligrams of so much in a product, and those are things you have to be familiar with. But the process, I'm only going to show you this slide, and again, just to understand there's a whole business behind it. And really, vape pens is probably where I see a lot of growth happening. And the problem with vape pens is I see people smoking more vape pens lately, and I'm like, I wonder if there's cannabis in there. Now, I'm not a smoker of cannabis. I did in high school. I'm just one of those young kids. But I'm all right if that's medically what you're using because it's healing you. And I've seen reports reports on multiple sclerosis, kids with lots of seizures. I've actually seen reports and seen studies where it's actually getting rid of the seizures, not smoking it, putting oils in. Again, the side you don't really hear about. Now, I showed this video last year, but I found there's a couple explosions that have happened, and legally I can't get information from people who don't want to give it to me, right? Because they're afraid. And I'm like, let's be transparent about what's going on. So I want to run this video for you, and then we're going to talk about it.
Another employee, when they opened up the door, it appears that an ignition source, oxygen or a static, ignited the butane and the fumes that was in the room.
Archibald claims New Mexican had turned a storage unit into the lab, didn't have fire extinguishers, and exits weren't accessible.
When the explosion happens, Mr. Montoya attempts to open that door but it did not open. So then he eventually had to go through the ball of fire.
So in this case, you heard the news report. They converted a storage room because, again, the manufacturing of edibles is the most profitable business into their edible room. Now, the one thing about this is really important is solvents used in this process are colorless and odorless. This is a big problem, so I'm going to go into a slide about public safety when you guys are responding to areas. But this case, they had the doors open inward, no safety training, no standards. All that OSHA fined them was $12,500, okay, for about 7 different things. The problem was when the fire department showed up and the police department showed up, they were like, well, what's inside? They didn't really know more about, I mean, they've done their checks, but they're like, we don't want to go in yet because there might be some other things happening. This video is a classic example of just, I'm a big believer in compliance. Whether you're following Tennessee Association Chiefs of Police standards, hi Maggie, to call you out there, whether you're following CALEA, whether you're following OSHA, I'm a big believer that there's a reason standards are in place. It's to provide quality, whether it's you as officers and your department's quality policing, but there's standards and there should be, and there's no standards in the industry. And I'm going to talk about that, and there's some coming out. Just when you go into an extraction room, there's a lot of things you should be seeing. A lot of this is set by state regulation. And we're going to talk about placard signs in a minute. But eyewash machines, all this stuff, when you talk about what should be in there, because right now it's been the Wild West. I'm a part of the green rush. I'm pretty excited that I got into this 2 years ago because it was interesting. It was going into a business that I was like, I walked into the facilities, and again, I walked in looking at, why do you have a dog running around in your cultivation site when you're growing medicine for people? That makes sense. Why do you have a extraction room without an eyewash container? Right? All those safety issues. So as you guys are going in the states that are legalized, when you're going to visit these businesses, go walk through. And don't, because you're not the fire department, doesn't mean you can't say, okay, if my officers are in this facility and something happens, I want them to have the safety precautions that are necessary there. And the only way that gets done is if you're a part of legislation on the onset, and don't let industry drive the legislation, but be a partnership in it, that you can demand those kind of things. And you can talk to a lot of the chiefs here who are in states that have legalized that Colorado's regs have changed so much, but I follow every change because they're learning. They're learning. Okay, this is my favorite on extraction. So I just YouTubed because I got the hand raised about the butane explosions. So I YouTubed marijuana extractions, and I only showed 4 of the, I think, 3 million results that were there. But these have issues that you are dealing with on a daily basis. I see homes being burned. I get Google alerts just about every day for butane explosions, and I always save it. I research it. I find out what the problem was. So as I go here, here's the problem. All the explosions that have happened. I've literally got houses running off, and it's anybody. I'm not going to call it, it's not millennials. There's people that are much older than I am that are looking at YouTube going, oh, I think I'm going to try this because I remember smoking this back in XYZ days. Here's what happened to one YouTuber. And this was he's very fortunate on what happened to him. Okay, it's like what he was doing was he saw a video and decided he was going to try to make oil. So he got his lighter out and he's heating this beaker, and he doesn't understand about butane, that it's odorless. And what you don't see in the video is the guy coming out of the kitchen. I think he was eating Cheetos. I'm not sure, but I have the full video here. He's like walking out going, what just happened? Like and the guy sits back down on the couch like nothing happened. It's amazing, but that flash was just the intense flash you get. Now, do you know that as police officers? My twin brother's one of the firefighter with LA County Fire Department. Fire departments get trained on all the time. I was just out there 2 weeks ago at one of their sessions, and I said there needs to be a partnership with fire and police in educating what these things mean. Now, I'm going to switch back to Eric, and then we're going to go back to another thing, so there's more industry stuff to cover. But the important part is like, I wanted you to rethink about what you just saw. Like, I didn't know the NFL was in it. I didn't know Scott's Miracle-Gro was putting money into it. If big companies are putting money into it, their lobbyists in Washington know something is happening. My personal belief is medical marijuana will be federally illegal within about a 6-year period, regardless of the administration, because I believe the tests that are going to start happening from all the universities testing it, and you'll start seeing these findings about how it's actually working. Maybe not the THC part of it, but the other parts, I believe you'll see that happen. But I'm going to let Eric talk about the really exciting stuff, policies.
How did you get the exciting part of this presentation? I don't understand. All right, so obviously, let's get to the boring legal side, which is, obviously, we know that it's going to have some effects, we have to start dealing with the policies that address it. And you threw Maggie completely under the bus in the middle of everything. I did not throw her under the bus. But I'll just back it up again. So a project we have with Tennessee Chiefs, I sent them a marijuana policy. Maggie called me up and says, "Why did you send me this?" Well, I said, "Because you should have it." He said, "Well, we're not going to get it here." I go, "Oh, yeah, you are." "No, you're not." "No, we are not." "Yes, you are. And it's going to be there sooner or later." So let's not wait. Let's just kind of look forward. It's always better to have. And what we know right now is the issue. You want to go back to that last one? Yeah. The current policy that we're running in the majority of the country is specifically as to the medical marijuana side, meaning the issues that you have to address in policy are what happens when your officer becomes the caregiver for someone who is authorized for medical marijuana. And it starts to make things a little interesting. In Connecticut, we went to medical marijuana, and our legislatures decided that those responsible for medical marijuana could carry up to a pound on them at all times. As a supplier? Oh, what if that is an officer? Can it be an officer? Well, obviously, that's going to challenge some areas because your spouses, your kids, your family members, and we can't just go, which what I will say as we go across the board, my response has been, officers are not going to use it. Yes, but what can they do with it? And what are the dedication? All I care about at this point is what are the requirements for the officer to report to the chief what's going on in their life, right? What involvement they have. Because when you get that call, hey, isn't that a police officer buying marijuana in this store? Why are they doing that? It's going to open up issues. And as Jody said yesterday very well in the employment law update, we haven't seen any law yet on FMLA interpretations or ADA interpretations. So the beginning of this is you have law in your area. If you have law in your area on medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, that law needs to be transposed into your department policy for guiding application until we start to get more interpretation. That is the next part, which is we're already seeing court cases coming out, and we just threw 3 up there on the side, the for and the against. So in Oregon, in a case entitled the Emerald Steel Fabricators versus BOLI from 2010, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that employers are not required to accommodate medical marijuana use. Right? Is that a rule? Is an important ruling? It is, and obviously in that area we're going to need some legal interpretation. California side of the house, Shepherd's versus Cole Department Store, a 2006 case that came out of California where the court said Cole's policy now provides that workers in certain states, including California, who possess valid recommendations for medical marijuana won't be discriminated against in termination or other employment decisions, the court said. Again, now we're starting to analyze it in disciplinary matters, and how is that going to be used? Just so you're aware, because I see a lot of you, as you always do, take pictures, the download is on the app right now, so we will update it to a couple that, because Tim's ADHD would not allow him to continue to use the same one all the way up to the time we started, so he updated it. Rhode Island and California, left corner all the way at the bottom, in a case called Callaghan versus Darlington Fabric Corporation. The Rhode Island Supreme Court in May of 2017 ruled that under Rhode Island law, an employer cannot refuse to hire medical marijuana cardholder even if the applicant admits during the interview that he or she will not be able to pass the employer's mandatory pre-employment drug testing. Right? Is that going to have an effect on us? No, and how? Because yes, one of the steps for us in acceptance of our new recruiting and retention is the drug testing application of it. And what does that correlation to medical use, family member use mean? THC on the hands, how it gets into the body. On the other side, we see 3 that we picked out here. Colorado, Coates versus Dish Network LLC, 2015 Colorado Supreme Court ruling. Brandon Coates argued that the satellite provider violated the statute by firing him for using medical marijuana after work because he was acting in accordance with Colorado law. The Colorado Supreme Court came back and ruled that employers can fire workers who use marijuana for medical reasons, even though it's legal in that state. And we went, oh, okay, well, that's going to give us some challenges. And our Colorado attorneys over here are the ones twitching, but those are the ones that have the interpretation and the legal officer side. We have a case out of New Mexico, Garcia versus Tractor Supply Company, a 15 case also, where New Mexico court finds that an employer had no obligation to accommodate medical marijuana use. And finally, in Montana, Johnson versus Columbia Falls Aluminum Company, a 2009 court case. The court ruled that failure to accommodate use of medical marijuana does not violate the MHRA or the ADA because the employer is not required to accommodate an employee's use of marijuana. So the one thing I hope that you take out of this slide is that, and there's a link to all these cases, and if you click on the link in your PowerPoint or your PDF, you can read these cases. But as a legal advisor, especially because we're covering such the broad realm of the country, is this something that you need to get in contact with your legal representative, your policy writers, and you need to evaluate the case law in your jurisdiction as it's coming out now. Don't wait till it's too late. Using that as the basis to put your policy. So yes, if you're not one of those 29 states, you might not yet have a policy. But as soon as you get to decriminalization, that policy should, especially if you're a strong union area and where you might have some required negotiations to put that policy into play. We know what happens if we wait till the last minute. Now we wait another 12, 15 grievance procedure before we can actually get the policy into play.
The other point is it's not just a public safety issue, it's for all employers. So I talk to businesses around the country. I used to work for Coca-Cola. I called he's the VP of security for them, and I just started asking, you guys have people in every state. How are you guys dealing with the marijuana policy issue? Because here's the other thing is, let's say you have an officer that lives in a state that's legal, and they have a roommate, because sometimes in states you have roommates, right? And they're on medical marijuana. Now, unless you're in a state that allows smoking, they should not have anything in their blood system. But then again, is there a breathalyzer out there for that? You're all going to find out later because I've got some news on that, what's coming down the road. But it's very important. One of the issues that is, and I asked the question earlier about how many people believe that marijuana businesses cannot bank. And I saw some hands go up. And I know you don't want to be raising your hand like in school because you don't want to be looked at, but my belief is most people believe it's not legal, and that's what I thought initially. It's a targeted business, because here's what most people believe, and they are right. There's only about 300 entities that are allowing banking with MRBs out of all of the banks in this country. Okay. Now, I only know of 6 because I did my due diligence, and because these banks have to follow what are called SARS report. Who deals with anti-money laundering? Have you heard of AML and all that? So SARS reports. So if you look, I have a report. I'll make sure I include it on the update. That the FinCEN did a report last year. Their SARS report went up like this for MRBs that are now doing it. Now what you're seeing here is, again, I YouTube a lot, and I just go to Google and type in marijuana business robberies. And you'll see the different states. But one that's in particular, and the other note I want to make is, down on the bottom here, Nevada, they just legalized recreational, and in their first week, $27 million during their first month of sales. $27 million, I know gambling, and some people may win a lot of money, and then $3.6 million in taxes, and they actually had an issue where they ran out, and then because of the legislation, the way it was written, because of delivery laws, there was a lawsuit it's unionized, by the liquor board saying you can't just hire anybody to start doing this. So it's a business that's growing, and you have to understand, you may not like it. I understand that. You may not believe in it. I understand that. But if it's legal in your state, accept it and understand how you can be a part of solving it. So let me show you this video from this from this robbery.
Closing time, 10 p.m. Sunday. Two men force their way into the Have a Heart marijuana shop. One has a gun. They bind up 3 employees inside with zip ties and start ransacking the store of weed and cash. Industry Insider says pot shops are being robbed more frequently because thieves know it's an all-cash business.
All cash, and thieves know that. I'm going to tell you, you can talk to anybody that's in any of the legalized states. I've been to Denver, has a great symposium. Anybody from Denver here? Denver, you guys do a great job on the symposium. It was last week, it's the 3rd one. I'll tell you a little bit about that, but it's about opening the kimono dragon and not being embarrassed about what you learned during this process, and Denver's done a really good job of publicly telling people, here's why we're changing things. This happened to be an inside job because of the requirements for videos being recorded based off the regulatory standard, both from the state and the local jurisdiction. What most people have to understand is you can have state regulations. So the state of Colorado has the state regulation. However, the cities can choose to participate or not. And when Colorado went legal, about 33 out of the 300 plus counties decided to go recreational. And then from that, they can be more restrictive. So that's important because if you're a chief in a town that's thinking about it, you need to be on the committee. That's the police department, fire department, and the legal cannabis business owners, and sit down and talk through regulation and talk through what you guys should be doing. If you want to be more restrictive than the state, you can be. In most states, I don't know Washington. No, Chief Northum's here, but I think most states is it run by the state. In your state, it's just the state goes by. You're the state. So in some states it's different. And I've got a document that I actually put together before the trip, and if you email me or send me your card, I've actually got all of them in an Excel spreadsheet with every state regulation, with all the links, so you don't have to try to go to Google. It took me about 8 hours to put it together, and I can share it where you can click and see what other states are doing. It's very important to share and collaborate. Now, Chief, I told you I'd have you on my slide. I spoke to Chief Nordhorn last week or 2 weeks ago. Met him last year when I did my presentation, because again, I was new to this last year in presenting at IACP, and he was very gracious, came up, there's some things you didn't do right or didn't know, and I'm humble. I'm like, tell me what I learned. It was about extraction. I learned a lot from that. This is the sales. Now, you're looking at FY17 sales. Now, they're on a fiscal year of July to July. That's why it looks like it is, and they already have sales in 2018. So look at the numbers here. 1.3 billion in sales. 1.3 billion. In taxes, 253 million. Now, when Chief and I were talking, and I said, okay, you guys have been in the game for a while, like Colorado and some of the other states. Was it always good? Because what that 5% represents, that 5% represents how much is still paid in cash. Because the state, based off of their proactiveness, both from law enforcement, legislative, and the business, has been able to set up banking, right? Very important. And if everybody's on the same page, that starts preventing diversion from happening, right? There's all these things, and I commend what they've done in the state. So still to date, 5% of last year, $12 million that gets shown up at a tax office that didn't know how to handle when they got $150,000 worth of cash. You talk about procedures within that city, they're like, oh, this is what this looks like, right? Now, other states. I live in Florida, and I always update my slides because I love coming to IACP because I talked, and I was in a presentation earlier. I'm going to mention about Bitcoin and Paragon, which are cryptocurrency. I'm going to tell you why that's important. But starting on the left, there's a safe harbor out of Colorado, which I'm sure the Colorado people may be familiar with. Sunday, who's the CEO, they've actually, they service about 150 customers, do $85 million a month. Now, just in Denver, there's like 900 licensees. Now, this bank is only on 150 customers. They do $85 million a month they took off the streets. That's important, right? That's a safety issue. When you look at, the other thing is banking, because of the Cole memo, they can actually bank, but they're so compliant heavy. 6,000 reports in a month that bank has to report off those 150 to FinCEN and the STARS reports and everything else from compliance. Now, the reason I got into the cannabis compliance, because I was at Power DMS and I was learning a lot from compliance, and I just said, this is an industry that needs help. Just like you police officers, when you have a use of force case, Lawyers go after you not about the case. Did you sign the policy? Did you sign a procedure, right? The same process. Florida, First Green Bank is handling 6 of the 12 licensees. Florida just got to 12 licensees. They're getting ready to do, I think, 5 more. And I've got a meeting with that bank. They right now do about $35 million year to date. Now, interesting enough, anybody from Hawaii here? Hawaii's not in the house. Okay. So based on, Hawaii went totally cashless in partnership with Safe Harbor, who's just now releasing a cloud-based system for MRBs, marijuana-related businesses, to do banking so they can track all the compliance issues. Because the biggest problem with every marijuana business I've gone and talked to is compliance. It's no different than if you're getting accredited and it's policies and procedures, right? Compliance is really heavy. It's important that that's happening. And I was, on the bottom left, California is getting ready to release. They had like 9 months. They had everybody participate from the state. That link will take you to their site with all the recordings. You'll hear police chiefs, you'll hear city officials talk about the challenges. You'll hear about stories of people getting held for ransom, owners who have a legitimate business. And I'm only telling you this, until I got myself educated, I was like, this is a problem. But how can we help? Okay, back to the fun stuff. Search and seizure.
The interesting part is, just to follow up on what Tim said, we've seen a problem. We were just talking dinner last night, Chief Villegas, LAPD, and as you know, California is going as of January 1st, and LAPD was asked to provide a plan for LAPD to protect the movement of money into the city to pay their taxes, and how LAPD was going to be responsible for the escort and the protection of the cash that was going to come in and handle that. Is that a problem? Yeah. And I've sarcastically, as a lot of you know me, I sometimes make things very simple, but one of my biggest concerns on the legal side is it's starting to smell a lot of like prohibition. And it's starting to smell a lot of the problems that we had in prohibition. And we learned a lot from prohibition and the after taxes of that. So we have to be aware of some of the issues. Some of the search and seizure issues, and I just have 4 of them I want you to pay attention to, because I think one is the most significant, which is this one, and I'll tell you 2 versions, and especially Colorado and Washington, who's been doing it the longest. Those people are the experts because they've been dealing with it so much. But in the Colorado Court of Appeals 2014, in a case called Young versus Laramie County Sheriff's Office, Mr. Young was arrested and his medical marijuana plants were seized by Laramie County sheriffs. So they were cut off at the root. And what do we do well in law enforcement? We hold stuff. We're a bunch of pack rats. So we just hold things for a long time. Well, what happens when you cut a plant and you put it in holding? It dies. Right? And now the value of that plant is what's at issue, because it's no longer a healthy growing plant. So the charges were later dropped, and the dead plants were returned to the individual, saying, hey, well, you want your evidence back? Here's your dead plants. And he turned around and filed a 1983 lawsuit that said, wait, you violated my rights, especially under Amendment 20, were violated. Now, one of the things that you all could take into account is that we know that from what law enforcement does in the search and seizure side, execution of warrants and seizure of the evidence that's there, we know that there is a high probability that the court case might be dropped or negotiated down, and therefore we're going to be left with the results of taking someone's profitable business away and the litigation that's going to come from that. So the issue in this case, what are you doing? You're getting excited. Don't get excited. Is the marijuana possession from Amendment 20 a right under federal law? The court came back and said, Young cannot seek relief under 1983 for the destruction of marijuana plants because the destruction did not impair a federal right. Now, the interesting part of that articulation is they were filing in federal lawsuit for a federal civil rights violation, but what's the law say? It's not legal, so you can't get back. You're not legal. You can't sue me in federal court because of that. So what does this basically say? Well, you probably should sue in state court. You might have another way to do this. One of the interesting cases, they also made a difference here. Makes no difference whether they died or not, they were still returned. I'm sure all of us lawyers will be using that as a quote in our briefs. That's how it was interpreted. I recently heard of a case, and I was getting some information on this the other day from a department who does not want to be disclosed right now, where they did a large seizure, large seizures, and as you know, our holding facility for large seizures are difficult. So what do we do with it? Go ahead, you can say it, it's therapy. Literally, we burn it. Well, what happens when the case gets thrown out and they come to pick up their evidence? Well, we couldn't hold a truck full of marijuana, so we burned it. Okay, well, that's a value for me. It's a sellable item. Who's paying me for the value of that weed that you just burned that I should be able to turn around and sell? That is going to be a problem for us. So what does that lead to? The next issue we've seen out of Colorado, where agencies are actually doing search warrants because there's confusion of medical, who's growing it, where is it growing it. So they still are trying to enforce laws, and they do a search warrant, walk into a house, find marijuana, fill out the whatever your page for seizure logging of the evidence is, and leave it right where it is and walk away. Why? Because we can't take it, because if a court turns it over, what are we going to do with it? It's going to be gone. These are seizure issues that are significant in our everyday operations that we should be paying attention to. Go ahead. All right, so next is the issue between federal and state law, the conflict that occurs, especially when it comes under seizure and search and seizure. The issues with that, as you all know, search and seizure 101, the federal government makes a rule, interpretation by Supreme Court. The state government has the ability to only restrict the ruling that the federal government made. So we can't expand upon it, we can only restrict it. And as you all know, all of your states, whether they're in the more conservative and the more liberal side, can restrict the legal aspects to it. So in this case, in 2002, on a Supreme Court case, California's Prop 215 allowed a patient or his primary caregiver to cultivate or possess marijuana on the advice of a physician, bolstering by this enactment certain groups organized to supply marijuana to patients in a manner consistent with the act. So what does that mean legitimately? Somebody said, hey, here's a great business opportunity. You don't have to grow the 15 plants. We'll grow it for you. And then you just come buy it for us under the Marijuana Compliance Act for medical, and that's the business we'll get into. The Oakland Cannabis Buyers Cooperative is one such group, and the United States government turned around and sued them. They sued them to stop the cultivation and distribution of marijuana in violation of federal law. Legal under state, violation under federal. The issue that went to the Supreme Court, as it always does, has to be an issue. Is common law medical necessity a legal cognizable defense to charges under the Controlled Substance Act? Now, you're going to see me refer to it as CSA. CSA is the Controlled Substance Act. The court came back and said there is no medical necessity defense to a charge under the Controlled Substance Act, which left the issue wide open and left the issue no guidance on how that changed. Gonzalez versus Rich, Supreme Court case from 2005. The facts of the case similar to what we just talked about. Defendants were growing medical marijuana in their home pursuant to the medical marijuana laws, the medical aspect. The feds came in, seized their plants, citing the Controlled Substance Act. There was an alleged violation. They were enforcing federal law. The question is California's medical marijuana law, is it superseded by the federal law that oversees it? And the court came back in this case and said yes. The difference today, as Tim said, is that we think that while in 2005 the court said yes, here we are now in 2017 with 29 states playing in the sandbox. We think we're going to see a case when the Supreme Court is brave enough to take it that is going to change this application. The court said under the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, the CSA allows the criminalization of the product and the use of homegrown marijuana, even in states where the medical marijuana is legal. Again, the conflict between state and federal. And finally, the last one. Are you testing me?
I am.
All right. Smith Day versus Hickenlooper is a Kansas City sheriff's and prosecutor's lawsuit, a 2016 case. And in this case, sheriffs from 3 states challenged Amendment 64. They challenged the conflict between the federal and the state law governing marijuana. They contended that Amendment 64 was created or has created a constitutional challenge for the sheriffs. because they swore an oath to uphold both the U.S. and the Colorado Constitution, and Amendment 64 is causing them to violate the oath that they swore. Good argument, right? Tell us what to do. Somebody make a decision here, because we're walking down the middle of a road with cars going both ways against us, and if I step right, I'm getting run over. If I step left, I'm getting run over. Somebody's got to give us some guidance. The issue being looked at here was, does the Amendment 64 cause a, quote, direct physical harm, end quote, to the individual sheriffs who have made the choice between following the U.S. Constitution or the Colorado Constitution? Interestingly enough, as the lawyers will tell you, when we see things like dismissed with prejudice, we see that the courts were not brave enough to make a decision. And they don't want to make a decision again, so they make it go away. They do the Heisman. They're like, nope, not dealing with it. We don't want to deal with it. In this case, they dismissed the case with prejudice, which means you can't bring it back. And after finding that the plaintiffs, the sergeants, lacked standing in making the legal argument. I find that very interesting, and Judge, I'd like a very interpretation. I don't know, but I think if I research standing, I think that the issue under the question of what do you want me to do, violate the state or the federal law, I think a sheriff and a police chief have standing in that argument, but of course that's why they don't give me a road. The CSA does not create a private right of action. The order was quoted, interestingly enough, because you as police executives use it all the time, the order quoted the Safe Streets Act decision. And basically it said, as they do in immigration, chief, sheriff, colonel, commissioner, whatever you're called, whatever, it's your job to decide the enforcement in your area. That makes it just warm and fuzzy for you, doesn't it? But as I would say, in one of the significant parts as I give it back to Tim, is at least, especially in my neck of the wood, which is the Northeast region. So all of you from my famous New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, they're okay. We really have had to restart retraining unfortunately, our senior officers, because one of the things that we're seeing consistently in the reporting is always the initiation of the smell of marijuana that opened the car stop, the search of the car, the search of the person, the search of the home. And I will tell you, while a lot of states, especially in our areas, and now Massachusetts going legal, a lot of the states don't have rulings that specifically say the smell of marijuana can no longer be the pretextual basis for the application of search and seizure law. It's coming. And the reality is, because I know it takes a lot longer to turn the aircraft carrier than it does the court to issue the decision, we should just probably start turning the aircraft carrier. And what I tell the officers nowadays is, listen, I get it, the smell, I'm not going to tell you you can't use it, but I'd like a little bit more. I'd like to see, burnt material. I'd like to see paraphernalia. I'd like to see ashes. I'd like something more. So just don't do that. Ooh, I smelled it, we're good. That's going to be a challenge in the search and seizure world.
And I'll just follow up to that. It's interesting because there are 29 states and DC, right? So DC has been legal recreational for a while. But I think all the states state that it is legal, but you cannot do it in public consumption, with the exception of Denver, who's going to be opening up their first, did it pass in Denver? The new smoke club. There's a new club they tried to put together. But in most states, it's not publicly, you can't consume it, whether you have a medical card. The other challenge you have is, without a good partnership with all your regulatory bodies within the state, if the Department of Health is running it and your officers pull somebody over and the person pulls out a medical card and you've not done any training on what a medical card looks like, how do you authenticate that? Those should be conversations you should be having with all the different departments, because counterfeit medical cards, you think that's happening? If I get pulled over, people are like, oh, I'm just going to get a medical card, even though I don't do medical marijuana, and I'm buying it from whoever else. I can give it to the officer, maybe I'll get off. You have to understand that whole process about, and all the cities I've talked to and all the states I've talked to, and I appreciate all the input, it's about collaboration, it's about teamwork. It's not a police department thing. It's just not. Now, emergency preparedness. The reason I did this is, safety is an important part of everybody's job, and what you guys do on a daily basis, you've got enough problems going on with use of force and all the other things, but understanding what you're going into. when it does become legal. Even in Florida, you know, it just got passed, and I see police departments asking, do we know any training on it? Have we done anything on it? So when I talked to some of the chiefs around the country, I said, what are the issues that you would really like to be discussed? Because I only learn from asking questions. Being the youngest of 17 kids, I asked a lot of questions, right? So no one has to volunteer, because I might pick on Chief Hughes back there because I see him in the audience. So scenario is armed robbery at a marijuana extraction business. Negotiations not working via the CCTV, which is required by that entity. The hostages are in imminent danger. All right, hostage taker has a weapon. What next? So when I walk the floor of IACP, man, do I hear a lot of toys out there, right? Flashbangs and all this stuff. So technically, typically what I see is a response is, okay, we got a breach, we got to go in. You throw in your toys, right? The question is, what happens? The reason this is important is those signs right there. Last year when I had this presentation, I had one sign. I asked the audience, can anybody tell me what that means? What those numbers mean? Right? Call the fire department. I heard someone say that, right?
Call the fire department.
That does mean that, but you're putting your officers at risk, and this is a serious challenge. Is I saw that when I have clients in California, I have clients in Nevada. I do walkthroughs, and my mind is like, okay, if there's a situation where there's a bad thing happening, how do fire and police get protected? Because my mind's not just on compliance for the business. That's a big thing. Now, there's a group here, part of ICP. I mean, if you want to mention.
You may not know, and one reason why I wanted to jump in on this was your officers on their phone. The one thing the younger officers do very well is they bookmark a lot of research aspects so that they can respond quickly and get information. If you didn't know, the chairwoman of in IACP, the Environmental Crimes Committee, came up to me and said, please tell everybody that on the website for the Environmental Crimes Committee, which is listed below, which is, go back. What are you doing again? I'm taking that clicker away from you soon. IACP.org, Chem Safety. In there is a whole library of placards. And I did speak with them about trying to maybe get some more marijuana aspect response, environmental concerns in there. But one of the most valuable tools for anyone, and we've all sat through the academy class where they give you the book that nobody knows where it is anymore, right? And Aaron got it absolutely right. It wasn't ambulance before cruiser, it's at least fire before cruiser, right? So the reality of this is please distribute to your officers links like the IACP ChemSafe site so that they can research the placards quickly while they're on the road and be able to understand that information. And
that's so important. So I was in LA 3 weeks ago. Battalion Chief McCormick, who's the LA Fire Department, is part of their cannabis division. I met with him and about 75 other entities. The police department wasn't part of that discussion. But part of it was, I told Chief McCormick, I was like, this needs to be a group effort. My twin brother is a firefighter, and I was like, what's the beef with police? I said, you guys need to come collaboratively on this, because if your officers, call your fire department was what I've heard everywhere else, but you got seconds to make a decision. You throw something into that thing that you're not aware of what's in it, guess what you just caused? Remember that other explosion where we saw in that video? You caused a much worse situation. So public education, the link to NFPA site, you can build it yourself. I don't care if you do a PowerPoint and you put together the links and just train your officers the 4 major types of extraction, butane, and all these. What do those signs mean? Because that's healthy to know. Now, PPE. Denver does a really good job of this, and I'm going to show you a slide with some free videos they've done that they don't care if you use them. But PPE, so think about, everybody's like, oh, we got marijuana now in our state. And then the chief goes, hey, we need someone to run the marijuana group. Let me get one of my sergeants or captains that are really smart, and hey, you've been doing policy for a while. And this guy's like, what? And then they're going to start doing inspections. Inspections when they go in. Now, who's been in a cultivation facility before? Raise your hand if you've been in one. Okay. Raise it high so I can see. Okay. Who's in a state that's legal that has not gone in one of those? Who's in the state that's legal? Okay, I'm going to tell you right now is, and Chief will probably, when you walk through and you have your guys walking through all day, guess what they smell like? Guess what their clothes smell like? Guess what all that stuff is, right? So PPE is very important. See the bottom thing I put in? When in doubt, have an operator go in the room first to make sure it's safe. You think I'm joking about that, but here's why this is important. In cannabis and marijuana, cultivators are trying to figure out ways to grow their plants best, and they use different things, CO2 and all that. So you could be going into a situation, you open up a door and your officers pass out because they weren't aware of what was in that facility. Now, this list comes from Denver, right? I watched their videos. Can anybody tell me what the one piece is missing? I purposely left it out. It's down here on the bottom. What's missing there? It's $55 total. The one most important piece is Febreze. You laugh, but again, your guys are and girls going in and officers going in and doing inspections need to have this full. And I put together that list just so I kind of looked at what Denver was doing and said, okay, your patrol cars, you got 100 of them. Maybe there's a grant out there. And I'm searching for grants now through the federal government to help police departments and fire departments say, hey, there's a grant out here for education. You guys should take it where this, because you're all tight on budget. So important. Now, here are the sites from the city of Denver. Now, again, the links will take you right to their sites. And the top thing says they don't have a problem as long as you give them credit. They're very good starting points for training. And I'm going to commend the city of Denver. They have an annual marijuana symposium. It just happened last week. It was the third one. I've gone to every one but the last one. And I will tell you, the city does an amazing thing because all the departments get together and come as a group and talk about what has not gone right. Health department, fire department. And that collaborative effort is why Denver is getting better. And Washington does, I mean, when I talk to Chief about what's going on in Washington, the collaboration with the banks and things going on, it's necessary. But those trainings are great. They're YouTube videos. The bit.ly link is just so I can track how many people went, because I'm a nerd like that, and no one, Eric's like, what the heck is the bit.ly link? Anyhow, those will take you right to their site on YouTube. But they're good, and download them. And if you have a problem, don't know how to download it, call me and I can tell you how to do it. It's very easy on YouTube. But put them into your training protocol, like, hey, decriminalization just happened. Let's just watch these videos and see what that means, right? And I'm sure there's other states with tons of other information. The one thing my wife has told me is I work from home more often, but I'm on my computer so much because I'm doing so much research that it's like going down the rabbit hole. I saw a slide earlier. There's just so much. And I applaud those states that have been going through this because they're just like me. This is new to us. What do we do? And they learned. Now, I was walking the floor today and I saw Bob Stevenson from Michigan, Chiefs of Police. Anybody from Michigan in here? Yeah. So I saw Bob and I was catching up with him and he was asking me what I was doing these days because last year Maggie called me the marijuana guy. So she said, oh, you're now the marijuana guy, you're a trader. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to help businesses. So in talking to Bob, he told me about an issue. So I added this slide today. Do you have laws prohibiting booby traps? Do you know? Raise your hand if you know you have laws that prohibit booby traps. And in that law, do you have laws that prohibit certain types of booby traps or what types? And the reason that's important.
The latest night, Wyoming police officer was injured after falling on a bed of nails. Officer was hurt Sunday night at a marijuana grow operation on Clay Avenue in Wyoming. The officer jumped a fence and landed on a homemade trap meant to keep thieves out.
When you look at things like this, obviously they're a target, not of us, because that's to protect them from what is drawn to that business, and that's illegal activity.
I just pulled it up today. I was at lunch with Eric, and I'm like, I got to add this because this is something I haven't thought about. On the bottom, a legal grower decided that to prevent things from happening, they built plywood with nails coming up, lined along the fence, and then put leaves over it. Now, in the state, they can't charge the business owner because their booby trap law only addressed spring-loaded devices and not nails. Now, I thought that was important. A bit of knowledge. I was like, really? So when you think about things like this is the things that you have to think about in your business. And that officer hopping over the fence because he saw the window, and when he went down, a bed of nails went into his foot. Now, the only thing you would know is if you have a relationship with those entities and walking around and say, hey, you doing anything special for security? Oh yeah, we made booby traps. Really? Tell me more, I want to learn. Then you're like, well, you can't do that because you need to know that when you're responding. Very important. So I want to thank Bob Stevens down because I talked to him and I told him I'd give him credit if he was here, but it was an interesting conversation. A few final thoughts and then we'll take questions. The one thing I hear around the country, and this is not just from law enforcement, it's not just from fire, it's not just from marijuana-related business owners. The thing I hear the most is collaboration. Now, teamwork, collaboration, and involvement. I mentioned the Denver Symposium on the bottom that just happened. When they have their next year, I would highly recommend you going because it's such an educational event. I believe that to have a successful program, you got to take the I'm the enforcer hat off. I'm now going to be a collaborator. What I've heard from the chiefs around the country that I've talked to is like we go and talk to the business owners. We have joint boards that include law enforcement, fire, health department, and owners of the business, right? Everybody's involved. It's a family affair. It's no different than how many are worried about community policing, right? That's a big issue, community policing. This just needs to be added if you have legal marijuana in your state. Is start going in and talking to the business owners. What you're going to find out is not a bunch of people who are like, and there are some that are like, oh, I don't want to see the cops. They might remember me from way back when, right? But I'm going to tell you that I go to marijuana conferences to give the same talk, but on the public safety side, and I say, just go introduce yourself. And I tell all the businesses that do business with me, I'm like, the first call you should make is to the police department, talk to the chief, get an appointment, and get to the fire department and the public health. If you haven't done it yet and your state is legalized, you need to get that done. This goes back on the, change your brain. This was a quote from Denver I used 3 years ago. The first step is acceptance. It's kind of like there's 5 stages of grief. Denial, oh my God, whatever, you go through those 5 stages. There's a lot of people last year when I got into this and had this conversation, they were still in disbelief. But I'm going to tell you, accept it and figure out how you can get ahead of it before it gets ahead of you. Because I'm going to tell you, lobbyists are spending a lot of money making regulations and laws that don't have participation. I applaud the associations, the chiefs associations that are getting active. And if you're not, find out who's writing those laws and be a part of that discussion. And don't come from a regulatory, come in from, I want to be on the team to understand so I can give input. Cops can't do it alone. I've told you that, instead of call the fire department, maybe it's time to learn a few new things, right? It's very easy to do. You don't have a lot to learn on that. Now, last year when I spoke, I had people come up and say, well, what about breathalyzers for marijuana? What's happening in that space? So what's happening, there's a lot of interesting things happening, and I'm going to run a video from one company called Hound Labs. That's in California that's been doing some testing. There's 3 companies out there, but NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, you may have heard that before. They do a lot of stuff. NIST is actually doing some studies. I've actually read the report. It'll put you to sleep pretty quick, so take some coffee. But I was just trying to find out what is this telling us. So let me run this video and then talk a little bit about what he's saying.
Breath is the only way that someone can measure the amount of THC and actually correlate that to true driving impairment. The Hound breathalyzer measures and detects marijuana for approximately 2 hours, maybe up to 3 hours, which is the same window that NHTSA has pointed to as the time frame for impairment. This is totally different than all the other measurement devices out there, saliva, blood, urine, and whatnot.
I will tell you, I reached out to 3 companies who are in the business of saying they have something. Heard back from 1. Right? I'm a big believer in transparency. Had a discussion with the CEO. He's a reserve officer on SWAT with the county that he's in. He's also a emergency room physician, and I believe they're doing some good things. They're coming out. They've partnered with the University of San Francisco on some testing. So as they take a reading, they're taking the lab result to see if they're matching up. I did put a link at the bottom. If you're interested in just having a conversation with them to see if you want to test out that they're doing. They're very open because they're looking for other people just to start figuring out if this is going to work. On the top left is actually the NIST, that's the NSTA, that's the National, sorry, my acronyms. National Safety Transportation Authority? There you go. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm learning. It was in the military, not like the Army. I learned a lot of acronyms. I remember that's a little slow.
Just couldn't remember.
I just couldn't remember. Well, it's because I was watching you guys walk by. I read their report, and in their report, THC is in breath, a maximum of 2 hours. After 2 hours is gone. The challenge you have in this is that it's like finding a specific drop of water in 100 swimming pools. Think about 100 swimming pools, and that's the challenge. Whoever figures out this race, from a company perspective, who's heard of Taser before? It's gonna be like a kind of another thing in Taser, but there are companies out there. Interesting what's going on. I have a blog. I'm gonna follow it to see what's going on, but I would challenge you to try testing it out. We'll take questions, but I appreciate what you guys do on a daily basis, your officers and your chiefs. I'm a big believer in patient safety and quality, and I'm a big believer in safety for officers and making sure that they're all right. It was an interesting ride when I took this, just told my wife I was quitting what I was doing, and she said, I'm going into the marijuana business, and she's like, what? But it was from a compliance perspective because I want to educate. So we'll take questions if there's questions. All of our information is up here. Again, I will email you, instead of the PDF, I'll send you a link to the PowerPoint presentation with all the videos if you want. It's a 117 meg file. It's pretty large, but I want to be collaborative. And if there's anything that you saw that didn't make sense, please see me afterwards because I'm only going to learn from what you guys tell us as a group. So are there any questions? Yes, ma'am. No, I understand that. Yeah, I can do that, and I'm sorry for your loss, and I respect. No, and I appreciate your. No, listen. I'm open to anybody's comments or discussions. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Who had a question? Yes, sir.
Just a question about governments doing it, whether it's local, state. You did it with alcohol, right? Where when alcohol first started out, the idea was you licensed the sin, right, and then controlled it as much as you could. Are there a lot of places doing that?
Yeah. So what's interesting is so I'll give you an interesting note about prohibition back in 1936 when it ended. The last state to legally end prohibition was 30 years after prohibition ended, right? It was Mississippi. Because what the federal government did was we're saying the sin is legal, however you classify it, right? and we'll let the states determine. And it was the South, it was in the Bible Belt. But so what's happening in, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, I'm going to tell you what I see. I see 29 states legalizing it, and counties have the right to vote against it. That's happened in Colorado. It's happening in Florida. Florida just passed by 72% of its population. But there's counties that are saying, nope, we don't want it in. And I respect your position. If you live in that and that's your feeling, that's what's happening. It's going to be interesting over the next 3 years because it's federally illegal. Technically, if the Cole memo goes away, the businesses are screwed.
That's your legal opinion.
What about when the government decides they're going to be the sole proprietor?
Yeah, that's probably a bit above my, yeah, it's interesting. Because Canada's going fully legal, and there's some challenge. Are you from Canada? Yes. Okay, so Canada's an interesting dynamic because it is going legal, and you guys are having the challenge of how do we sell this? Because right now, you have dispensaries in Canada, but they're illegal, right? They are. People don't know that. They're like, you go to Canada, they're all over the place. That's, you saw all the countries that were up there. I'm following international stuff as well. I'm a part of 3 committees that are trying to build safety standards for products, and that's OSHA, FDA. I'm part of ASTM, which is like ISO. I'm part of Focus, which is another group, and then PFC. I'm just sitting back, just seeing what's going to happen. I'm not sure. It's an interesting dynamic.
I'm just curious, are there any city governments in the U.S., like the city governments who said we're not going to license any businesses to sell marijuana, however, we're going to be the dispensary?
No, from my limited knowledge, no city has done that because the cities like in Colorado, and here's how it's happened. Colorado, 33 counties approved it for recreation, not all 300. Well, after about 2 years of seeing tax revenues coming in, and I'm the little politician next door, and I'm like, whew, $75 million they got. Guess what the politician's next drive is? We should do it. And then what happens for the city, and I've seen this in the City of Denver conference, I'm sitting next to 2 young ladies who are doing audits for the city in other departments, and they're just stressing out. I'm like, what's wrong? They're like, well, we've been told we're the ones going to be monitoring and regulating this, right? So I haven't seen that happen, but I'd be surprised if it did because that wouldn't make sense if a city says, no, it's illegal, but we're going to run the dispensary. Well, I've got some great Cheech and Chong clips, yes. Yes, sir.
So one of the things with, I know some states have passed nanograms per milliliter for impaired driving, but a lot of states haven't. So a lot of the pro-marijuana people fight the argument for any number. Why would we buy a toxilizer breath machine to test it if we can't get a number that we can use to, what's the point of
Yep. So the question was, a lot of states, and that's true, have not set a limit like on blood alcohol level for THC. And it's because there's no research done, right? There's no research. So I believe what's happening in the race to find out who builds the THC breathalyzer, if that's what it becomes, is doing sampling. Because the one I showed with Hound Labs, I talked to the CEO, they're partnering with the San Francisco Medical Center so when the test happens, they take the same results and they go take it to the lab to get tested to see if their results are coming out. But a lot of states, and I don't know in Washington or some of the other states, they're thinking about what that level is. The problem is there's no research to tell you what that level, legal research. We all know that there's an impairment level. And that's the problem with the United States in that case, is that there's no legal research.
Yeah, to that. And also to the other issue with that is we agree. The question's going to happen is you're going to come out of the legislature someday. There's going to be there's going to have to be a number. There's going to have to be at some point. The companies that are trying to formulate this now, whether they're successful or not, once that number comes out, we're going to need a mechanism that's going to have already been past the compliance testing portion so that it's ready to go. Whether or not you buy it, I don't think it's for sale yet. And that's the issue is they're looking to collaborate with as much law enforcement as they can earlier so that when it does get to that point, that it becomes a tool that you would effectively buy. Because you're absolutely right. Why would you buy it if it has no value to your prosecutorial portion? The key is that we can't wait for one to get in line for the other. This is already in the Colorado. If you talk to the drug recognition experts and the prosecutors and the issues that are occurring in Colorado and Washington, It's a free-for-all still, and we just don't want that free-for-all to continue as, we're gonna be able to limit it as soon as we possibly can. And that means, yes, would you buy it now? No, it has no value to you. Would you participate in the study, in the analysis, in the building of it, or prosecutorially investigate? Yes, why? Because we don't want to wait for the testing process till after the law comes out as to what it is. There will already be enough litigation once the threshold level is met, that the testing will be the biggest part of that.
And I will tell you, in the state of Washington, what I would say is, I think one of the links has it on my presentation, transparency with data is so important. They have a great site. I went to their site. I was blown away by all the data that I'm collecting, how many violations, all this stuff. And I think to your point is that's just more data points that need to be collected, and that's going to be discussed whether it's legally or not, but it's data, and it's happening. So any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Okay, yep. I do. I can, you and I can have an offline conversation. There's a whole, there's lots of great stuff from Colorado, Washington, but I can give you guidelines that you guys can go look at. It's an interesting thing because the standards and compliance that are being done, it's for everything. It's for growing, it's for edibles, it's just, there's a lot to it. And you have a lot of work ahead of you. I applaud you. I have the one document I have, which is every state with all the links to all the regs. I've done all the homework for you. I did specifically for the conference, knowing that, because I want you guys to be transparent. And again, I read through those stuff just to kind of see what new laws are coming out, because I need to understand it from both sides.
So, and add to that, while you guys are at this 1,000-foot level, the LOS section, we're more concerned about you as the CEOs. And you're gonna have to start dealing with the issues, because if you talk to your unions, they are already strongly pushing the fact that, hey, if it's legal, I can use it. And I'll tell you, our position is going to be, just imagine the headaches of OIS, an officer involved shooting, the blood testing, the alcohol testing, the THC levels, the FMLA, the ADA issues, all of the issues surrounding our operational aspect, and how do you test the officer coming into work who's carrying the bag of Doritos? We don't know. We joke about it because we don't know what to do and how to do it. But those on the CEO level, on the chief executive level, that's the area that you have to get ahead of and make sure that you're dealing with that with policy, and don't wait for the policy to develop because you have a court case that has your name on it. Get ahead of it to evaluate it, and so at least your officers know the standards.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to offer another resource. My name is Nancy Rogers. I'm from Aurora, Colorado. The Colorado Municipal League also has a very robust page on marijuana regulation, ordinances, stuff that goes into tax and licensing. Where's the money going to go? What part of the money does your department get? How are your officers involved in licensing? That's one of our biggest issues right now. We're having a battle. So they collect a lot of sample ordinances on everything marijuana. That's CML.org. And I think the International Municipal Lawyers Association also has a lot of marijuana resources. And they're just trying to make a big database of all these ordinances and all these regulations.
If you want to email me that, I'll just include it in I'll just add another line to the thing that's a reference. Any other questions? I want to bring up one other point that I realized I missed, so I'm going to go back for a second.
That's not good.
No, I think this is important because I heard it in a session this morning. Go back. Banking. I want to get to the banking. Come on. Okay. I added this morning Bitcoin, and thing called Paragon. Now, does anybody heard the term Bitcoin before? Raise your hand. Okay. Keep your hand raised if you understand what it is, because I still don't, right? Right? So this is very important.
Ask your kids, they'll tell you.
Well, what's interesting about Bitcoin, because there was a great presentation this morning at 8 by, I don't know who it was, but they were talking about an investigation they did on the deep dark web, and it was just amazing. And then the Bitcoin issue came up, and Chief and I talked about it because they're fighting that in their regs, they're going to put that you can't have cryptocurrency. You know, again, I think that was the case, right, Chief? Oh, that's right. Okay. So what they're doing in Washington is this collaboration effort, and that's what I learned from Chief when I talked to him, was like we have a relationship with the finance, so that when law enforcement needs to subpoena records from a financial side, from an MRB, they get it, right? Bitcoin and Paragon. If you don't, Paragon is a new coin. So there's over 1,000 types of what I'm going to call Bitcoins out there. It's cryptocurrency. There's 1,000 something. When Bitcoin started, it was like a couple pennies for a Bitcoin when it first started. Today, I looked at it, it was $5,800 a coin today, right? Paragon is one that's focused on the marijuana business. It started at 50 cents, it's at 95 cents, now it's at 250. Their thought is they're trying to create a system so that it's a closed loop so you can prevent diversion. The interesting part about this, and I think there needs to be a session on cryptocurrency here at the Chiefs Association, not by me, because I'm not, but someone, I'm going to find that resource and recommend it, because you need to understand what's happening in that space. It's coming. And I just mention it because you can Google what is crypto, or what is blockchain. Just Google what is blockchain. There's great videos. Learn it now, because it's happening. And in the investigation I saw, the officer made a joke back in whenever they did, they went to the chief and said, hey, I need $1,000 to buy some Bitcoin. At that time, it was like $100 and something a coin. I did the math on it. I was like, okay, they would have had $730,000 in value right now if they would have held on to it. But they were doing it because of a case. Something that needs to be brought up, it's happening. Any other questions? I just wanted to mention that, and I apologize for forgetting that. No, thank you for your time. Thank you for what you guys do. Have a great day.